Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
They called her the quiet one, the translator who never raised her voice, the human who sat in the corner during war councils, taking notes while generals shouted over star charts. But on the day the Kethran Armada surrounded Earth's last defense station, she did something no one expected. She opened a channel to the enemy flagship and spoke 3 words that made an empire kneel. The War Council chamber stank of recycled air and desperation. 7 species, 42 representatives, and exactly 1 human who nobody bothered to look at. Dr. Mira Voss sat in the back corner with her datapad, stylus moving in small, precise strokes, recording everything. The Thelian ambassador was currently pounding his primary fist against the tactical display, in which flickered with the red bloom of Kethran warships encircling the outer rim like a noose pulling tight. His secondary arms gestured wildly, gills flaring purple with rage. 37 cycles we have waited for Earth to mobilize proper warships, he bellowed, voice like gravel down a metal chute. 37 cycles of your species fumbling with diplomatic channels while the Kethran Dominion devours system after system. Mira kept writing. Her hand didn't shake. It never did during these meetings, even when Ambassador Thelian pointed all 4 arms at Earth's military liaison and accused humanity of cowardice for the 8th time that week. Commander Okoye, the liaison in question, stood perfectly still in her dress uniform, medals catching the harsh overhead lights. She was Mira's opposite in every measurable way. Tall where Mira was average, commanding where Mira was invisible, voice like thunder where Mira barely whispered. Okoye's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Protocol said humans didn't interrupt during Galactic Council proceedings unless directly addressed. Protocol was basically all humanity had left. The Sereni representative, a crystalline being whose facets glowed soft amber, clicked her segments together in what Mira had learned meant exasperation. The Thelian delegation forgets that Earth's entry into the Galactic Collective was recent. Their industrial capacity is pathetic, finished Ambassador Korvash, the Kethran defector who'd fled to Coalition space 6 months ago. His species looked like someone had taken a praying mantis and given it too many joints, too many eyes, and far too much arrogance. Even the defectors carried themselves like they were doing everyone a favor by breathing the same air. I do not say this to wound human pride, but to clarify tactical reality. Earth has 12 functional warships. 12. The Kethran Dominion sends more than that to suppress mining colony uprisings. Mira's stylus kept moving. She recorded Korvash's tone, condescending, bored, and the way Commander Okoye's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Not quite a fist. Restraint was something humans excelled at, mostly because they'd had to learn it the hard way after joining a galactic community that already had rules, hierarchies, and about 1,000 years of history humanity had missed while they were still figuring out warp theory. The human delegation understands the strategic situation, Okoye said, each word precisely measured. We are allocating resources. You are allocating excuses, Thelian snapped. Where are your planet crackers, your siege fleets, your orbital defense lattices that can actually stop a Kethran assault wave? In the corner, Mira wrote, Thelian doesn't understand human shipbuilding doctrine operates on completely different principles than collective standard. Also, he's an asshole. She didn't write that second part in the official record. That was just for her. The Sereni clicked again, this time sharp enough to cut through Thelian's building rant. Perhaps we should discuss the matter at hand. The Kethran fleet, currently surrounding Defense Station Gamma 9, represents the largest concentration of enemy forces we have encountered. They are demanding our surrender within 3 cycles. Or they will reduce the station and its 17,000 inhabitants to constituent atoms. Her facets dimmed to a somber rust color. This includes the human contingent stationed there. 437 humans, Mira amended mentally. She'd checked the roster that morning while drinking coffee that tasted like burnt sorrow because the station's recyclers were going to hell. The hollow display shifted, showing the station in exquisite tactical detail. Gamma 9 was a joint operation, one of those ambitious collective projects meant to demonstrate unity and cooperation, and all those other words that sounded pretty until you had to actually defend the thing. It hung in disputed space, technically neutral territory, which meant the Kethrans could claim they weren't actually invading anyone's sovereign system when they surrounded it with enough firepower to glass a continent. Legal loopholes. The galaxy ran on them. Evacuation? Someone asked. Mira didn't catch who. Her eyes were on the display, on the red indicators showing Kethran battlecruisers in an ever-tightening perimeter. 63 ships. That was the count this morning. Now it was 71. They were bringing in more. Insufficient time, the Sereni replied. Even if we dispatched every available transport, the Kethran blockade would... She stopped, went very still. They are jamming long-range communications. The chamber erupted, 5 species trying to shout over each other in 3 different languages. And Mira's translator implant was doing its absolute best, but mostly just gave her a splitting headache as syllables crashed into each other. She closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again, and kept writing because that's what she did. That's what she was good at, recording the mess so someone smarter could pass it later. Commander Okoye had moved to the tactical display, fingers dancing across controls, pulling up communication logs. Gamma 9's last transmission was 47 minutes ago. Automated systems only after that. What does the station commander report about Kethran intentions? That was Korvash, leaning forward with an intensity that didn't match his earlier boredom. Okoye's face stayed neutral, but Mira caught the slight tension around her eyes. Station commander is dead. A Kethran infiltration team took the command deck 6 hours ago. We've confirmed kills on all senior staff. The chamber went quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone realizes the disaster is worse than they thought. Thelian's gills fluttered. Then who is operating the station? Whoever survived. Okoye pulled up personnel files, faces flickering across the display almost too fast to track. Engineering crews, medical staff, civilian researchers. Last we knew, they'd barricaded themselves in the lower habitation rings. Mira's stylus stopped moving. She knew some of those faces. Dr. Chen from Exobiology, who'd sent her a 3-hour voice message about Kethran neural linguistics that Mira had promised to review and never did, because she'd been too busy with council prep. Lieutenant Morrison, who'd shared Mira's transport on the way to her first collective assignment and told terrible jokes about quantum mechanics the entire trip. A dozen others she'd met at conferences, shared meals with, exchanged research notes with in the quiet hours between diplomatic emergencies. 437 people who were about to become a statistic if someone didn't figure out how to talk the Kethrans down from their self-righteous rage. We cannot spare fleet assets for a relief mission, Thelian was saying, back to his practical brutality. The Kethran force would destroy any rescue attempt. We must accept the loss and reinforce our core systems. You're suggesting we abandon them? Okoye's voice had gone very flat. I am suggesting we do not compound a tragedy with a massacre. The Sereni's facets flickered uncertain amber. Perhaps negotiations. The Kethrans have accepted ceasefires before, under specific conditions. The Kethrans don't negotiate, Korvash said, and for once he didn't sound condescending, just tired. They dictate. You surrender or you burn. Those are the options they understand. Mira wrote, Kethrans have 17 documented instances of ceasefire agreements in the last 40 cycles. Korvash is either lying or incompetent. She knew which one she'd bet on. The tactical display updated again. Someone in Gamma 9's automated systems was still alive enough to punch out a distress beacon, though the message was fragmentary, corrupted by jamming. What came through was just scattered words. Under siege, casualties mounting, Catherine commander demands, and then nothing. The signal died mid-syllable. Ambassador Thelion turned away from the display. We should move to other matters. This situation is resolved. Resolved, Okoye repeated, still flat. 17,000 people surrounded by hostiles, and you call it resolved? I call it concluded. There is a difference. Mira had watched this dance before. The collective talked endlessly about unity and mutual defense, but when it came down to actual sacrifice, every species did the same calculus. How many of ours versus how many of theirs, and does the math work out? Humans were still the newcomers, still the species that showed up late to the galactic party without the right weapons or the right reputation. Easy to abandon when the numbers looked bad. She stood up. Nobody noticed. Mira was extraordinarily good at being invisible. 5'4", plain dark hair pulled back, grey suit that matched the walls, voice she'd trained down to library quiet because nobody listened anyway. She'd spent 18 months in the Collective Linguistics Corps, translating documents and attending meetings, and being professionally ignored by species that had been navigating galactic politics since Earth was still figuring out agriculture. She walked to the front of the chamber. Commander Okoye saw her coming and frowned. They'd worked together long enough for Okoye to recognize Mira's expressions, and this one apparently meant something, because Okoye shifted slightly, positioning herself between Mira and the rest of the council. Dr. Voss, she said quietly, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, Mira replied, which felt absurd coming out in her perpetual half-whisper, but she kept moving until she was at the tactical display, one hand flat against the projection controls. Now people were looking at her. Thelion, the Sereni. Korvash, with his too many eyes, all suddenly focused on the human translator who was absolutely not supposed to speak during council sessions. Protocol said humans didn't interrupt. Protocol said a lot of things. Mira looked at Korvash. The Catherine commander at Gamma 9. What's their name? He blinked, all 6 eyes in sequence. Irrelevant. Humour me? I do not see how... Their name, Mira repeated, and something in her voice made Korvash's mandibles click together. Warsinger Ketharos, he said finally. Dominion military caste, mid-tier command rank. Competent, ambitious, utterly loyal to Catherine's superiority doctrine. He tilted his head. Why does a human translator care about enemy commanders? Mira pulled up her personal files, fingers moving fast across the interface. Because I've read every piece of Catherine literature that made it into collective archives. Battle poems, philosophical treatises, children's stories, propaganda broadcasts, intercepted military communications. 43,000 documents covering 300 cycles of Catherine history. Congratulations, Thelion said. You have an academic hobby. This does not change tactical reality. She ignored him, kept pulling up files. Catherine culture is built on the concept of hierarchical challenge. Every interaction is a test of position. When they demand surrender, they're not just asking for submission, they're offering a chance to prove you deserve to exist in their hierarchy. The Sereni's facets brightened slightly. Meaning? Meaning they'll listen if you know how to speak. Mira looked at Commander Okoye. I want to open a channel to the Catherine flagship. Okoye stared at her. You want to do what? Talk to them. Directly. Before they start executing hostages. That is insanity, Thelion roared. The Catherines will mock any negotiation attempt. They will broadcast our pleas across their empire as propaganda. Let them, Mira said. I'm not going to plead. Korvash made a sound that might have been laughter or choking. You, a human, from a species the Catherines consider barely sentient, believe you can speak to Warsinger Ketharos as an equal? No, Mira said. I'm going to speak to him as a superior. The chamber went dead silent. Then Thelion threw back his head and laughed, a horrible wet sound. This is what Earth sends to war councils? Delusional academics? But Commander Okoye was studying Mira with an expression that said she was running calculations, weighing odds, considering impossible options. You think you can challenge a Kethran war commander? I think I can speak in a register he'll understand. There are 17 formal modes of address in Kethran military linguistics, each one denoting a precise relationship in their hierarchy. He's been broadcasting demands in Dominion Standard because that's what you respond to. Show him a human who speaks proper Kethran, who understands the layered contexts of their challenge-response protocols, and he'll listen. She paused. Or he'll kill me for the insult, one or the other. Comforting. I didn't say it was a good plan. I said it might work. The Sereni clicked thoughtfully. If the human translator believes she can delay Kethran action, perhaps... She will embarrass us, Thelian snapped. The Kethrans will record her fumbling attempt at their language and spread it across every system as proof of human incompetence. Mira looked at him. Worried about your reputation, Ambassador? Or the 437 humans about to die? His gills flared pure purple. Rage. Good. She was tired of being polite. Commander Okoye turned to the communications console. I'm authorizing the channel. Open frequency to the Kethran flagship. Priority diplomatic band. Commander, this is highly irregular. Someone started. Why, everything about this situation is irregular, Okoye cut in. We're out of conventional options. Dr. Voss wants to try unconventional. I'm not stopping her. She looked at Mira. But you get one shot. If they laugh you off the channel, we're done. Understood. The communications officer, a young Viridian whose scales were currently flickering nervous yellow, worked the controls. Static hissed through the chamber speakers, then cleared. A voice emerged, speaking Kethran High Command dialect with the sort of perfect enunciation that meant every word was meant to be heard by subordinates and archived for posterity. This is War Singer Ketharos of the Dominion battleship Unrelenting Descent. Your defense station is surrounded. Your forces are broken. You have 2 cycles to transmit your unconditional surrender, or we will demonstrate why the Kethran Dominion does not tolerate resistance. A pause. Who speaks for the dying? Mira stepped forward, closed her eyes, opened them, thought about Dr. Chen and Lieutenant Morrison and 435 other people who deserved better than being abandoned because the numbers didn't add up. She spoke. Not in Galactic Standard, not in the broken trade pidgin most species used. She spoke in Kethvar, the formal high speech that Kethran commanders used when addressing equals in their own caste, her accent shaped by 18 months of obsessive study and audio recordings and reconstructed phonology from fragmentary texts. Ketharos of the Red Blade lineage, war singer without compare, I am Mira Voss of the human delegation, and I see you. The silence that followed was profound. Then Ketharos spoke again, and this time his voice was different, uncertain. You speak the proper words. I speak the words you deserve, Mira replied, still in formal Kethran, and I come with a challenge. The council chamber had gone from silent to something deeper, the kind of quiet that happens when people stop breathing because they're afraid sound will break whatever fragile spell is holding the universe together. Mira watched the holographic display, which now showed nothing but the audio waveform of Ketharos's transmission, each spike and valley representing a Kethran war commander trying to figure out what the hell just happened. A challenge, he finally said. His voice had shifted from the broadcast formality into something more private, more dangerous. From a human. From the species that required 40 cycles to achieve basic warp capability. From the newcomers who sit in council chambers and say nothing while empires burn. From the species you have underestimated, Mira replied. She was still speaking Kethvar, and the words felt strange in her mouth. All those glottal stops and tonal shifts that took her 3 months to pronounce without sounding like she was choking. I invoke Kel Tharaim, the right of hierarchical challenge. Someone in the council chamber made a sound like they'd been punched. Korvash was staring at her with all 6 eyes wide. That's not possible. Kel Tharaim is only invoked between Kethran military castes. It requires... He stopped. You can't possibly know the protocols. Can't I? Mira pulled up a document on her personal display, the one she'd translated from a Kethran military manual that had been recovered from a captured supply ship 8 months ago. Nobody had paid attention to it because it was written in Old Kethran, a dialect so archaic that even Korvash dismissed it as ceremonial nonsense. But Mira had spent 6 weeks working through it line by line, cross-referencing with anthropological studies and linguistic drift patterns and 3 academic papers that exactly 4 people in the galaxy had read. She'd been the 4th person. Kel Tharaim, she said to the chamber, switching to galactic standard so everyone could understand. The right of hierarchical challenge. When a Kethran commander believes another commander has misjudged their opponent's position in the hierarchy, they can invoke formal challenge protocols. The accused commander must either accept the challenge and prove their assessment was correct, or acknowledge error and adjust their actions accordingly. The Sereni's facets flickered confused amber. But you are not Kethran. You cannot invoke their internal military traditions. The protocol doesn't specify species, Mira said. It specifies that any warrior who speaks the formal language and knows the proper rites can challenge a misjudgment. The Kethrans built their entire culture on the idea that hierarchy is universal, that strength and position transcend biology. They wrote the rules. I'm just using them. Commander Okoye had a look on her face like she was watching someone juggle active grenades while riding a unicycle over a pit of lava. Dr. Voss, do you have any idea what happens if a Kethran commander rejects your challenge? He declares me unworthy and executes the hostages immediately to prove his assessment was correct. Mira's voice stayed level. But he won't. You sound confident. I'm terrified. But Ketharos hesitated when I spoke proper Kethvar. He's curious, and curiosity is a crack in the armor. The display crackled. Ketharos spoke again, this time with something that might have been amusement threading through the formal cadence. You invoke Keltharaim, you, who I have never heard of. You, from a species that has contributed nothing to the Dominion's understanding of warfare. You claim I have misjudged your position in the hierarchy. I claim you have misjudged humanity's position, Mira corrected. You see us as weak because we arrived late to galactic civilization. You see us as irrelevant because our weapons are inferior to yours. But you have not looked at what we actually are. Then illuminate me, little human. What are you, if not the weakest link in the collective's pathetic chain? Mira took a breath. This was it. This was the moment where she either said something that made a war commander pause, or she said something that got 437 people killed. We are the species that survived 6 mass extinctions on our homeworld before we ever left the atmosphere, she said. We are the species that invented agriculture independently 7 different times because we were too stubborn to starve. Or we are the species that looked at a universe that didn't want us and said, "Watch us anyway." You think we're weak because we don't have your weapons, but you've never asked what weapons we do have. Words, Ketharos said dismissively. You offer me words. I offer your people oblivion. I offer you knowledge. Mira pulled up another file. Your fleet has been surrounding Gamma 9 for 17 hours. In that time, you've been running scans on the station's power grid, mapping out the defensive systems, identifying critical infrastructure, standard siege doctrine. You're being thorough. Your point? My point is that you've been so focused on the station that you haven't been scanning your own ships. Silence. Then, explain. Mira felt her heartbeat spike. This was the part where she was either brilliant or suicidal. 17 hours ago, when your fleet took up positions around Gamma 9, you established a standard communications network between vessels. Standard Kethran military encryption, rotating cipher keys every 47 minutes. Excellent security. I am aware of my own protocols, human. Are you aware that someone's been inside your network for the last 9 hours? The quality of the silence changed, went sharp. Impossible, Ketharos said. Kethran encryption is unbreakable by collective technology. We have verified this through countless engagements. You verified it against collective technology, Mira agreed. You never tested it against humans. She pulled up a data stream, fed it to the main display. The council chamber filled with scrolling Kethran military code, except parts of it were highlighted in red where subtle alterations had been inserted. Gamma 9's communications may be jammed, but their engineering staff is still alive, still working. And 3 of them spent the last 6 years doing network security research for Earth's intelligence division before they volunteered for collective service. She could hear Korvash making a strangled sound behind her, but she didn't turn around. They've been inside your tactical network since hour 9 of the siege. They've mapped your fleet positions, your power distribution, your ammunition reserves. They've identified which of your ships has the least experienced crew based on communication patterns. They've even figured out that your flagship's portside shield generator has a 0.3-second gap in the rotation cycle every time it refreshes. Ketharos said nothing. They sent all of that information through a tight beam transmission to collective intelligence 4 hours ago, before you completed the jamming perimeter. Which means every military commander in this sector now knows exactly where your fleet's vulnerabilities are. The only reason we haven't exploited them yet is because I asked Commander Okoye to wait. Wait for what? For this conversation. Mira shifted her stance. She was shaking now, adrenaline burning through her system, but she kept her voice steady. Here's what happens next, Warsinger Ketharos. You can reject my challenge and execute the hostages. You'll feel very powerful for approximately 6 hours, is until collective forces arrive with perfect intelligence on your fleet's weak points and tear you apart. Your ships will burn, your crew will die, and the Dominion will add your name to the list of commanders who failed because they underestimated their opponent. She paused. Or you can accept that humanity is not what you thought we were. Accept that we don't fight like you fight, that we don't win like you win, but we survive anyway. Accept my challenge, acknowledge error, and negotiate a withdrawal that lets you leave with your ships and your honor intact. The silence stretched so long that Mira thought maybe she'd miscalculated everything. Maybe Ketharos was just going to open fire and prove that some gaps in logic can't be bridged by clever words and desperate gambits. Then he laughed. It was a terrible sound. Like metal scraping metal, but it was genuine. You magnificent little creature. You've been sitting in that council chamber for how long, saying nothing while your betters argued? 18 months. 18 months of silence. And in that time, you learned my language, studied my culture, identified the precise pressure point that would make me hesitate. Another laugh, this one almost appreciative. You are a predator, Dr. Miravos. You simply hunt differently than we do. I hunt with information, Mira said. We all do. That's humanity's weapon. We watch, we learn, we adapt. And when everyone thinks we're harmless, we show them exactly what we've been preparing. Behind her, Commander Okoye had moved to the tactical console. She was pulling up the transmitted intelligence report, verifying what Mira had said. Her expression shifted from skepticism to shock, to something that looked like pride, and she caught Mira's eye with a small nod. The intelligence was real. The engineers on Gamma 9 had actually pulled off the impossible. Thelian was sputtering something about protocol violations and unauthorized intelligence operations, but nobody was listening to him anymore. Ketharos spoke again. The Kel-Tharaim challenge requires formal conditions. You must state what you demand if I acknowledge error. I demand you withdraw your fleet from Gamma 9's perimeter, Mira said. I demand you release all hostages unharmed. And I demand you report to the Dominion High Command that humanity is not a species to be underestimated. And if I refuse, then I release the full intelligence report to every military force in the sector, and your fleet becomes a target-rich environment for anyone who wants to test their weapons against Kethran shields. She paused. But you won't refuse, because you're ambitious, Warsinger. You didn't get to command a fleet by making stupid choices, and dying in a battle you can't win because you were too proud to acknowledge a clever opponent? That's not ambition, that's just waste. Ketharos was quiet for a long moment. Then, you understand us better than most species who have fought us for centuries. I had good source material. What will you do with this intelligence data if I withdraw? Seal it. Keep it classified. No one needs to know how vulnerable your fleet was unless you force the issue. Mira felt something loosen in her chest. He was negotiating. He was actually considering it. You get to leave intact. You get to report that humanity demonstrated unexpected capability, which raises our position in Kethran threat assessment without humiliating you personally. Everyone saves face. Everyone survives. You would let me leave. I would let you leave with a better understanding of who we are. That's worth more than a battle. The waveform on the display spiked and fell. Mira watched it, trying to read emotion in the pattern of alien speech, trying to guess which way Ketharos would break. I invoke my right to consult my command staff, he finally said. Kethran protocol allows for this under challenge conditions. Understood. How long do you need? One of your standard hours. I'll be here. The channel closed. The council chamber erupted into arguments. Thelian shouting about precedent. A Korvash demanding to know how humans had cracked Kethran encryption. The Sereni trying to establish some kind of order and failing miserably. Mira walked back to her corner. Sat down. Put her head in her hands. Commander Okoye followed her. Sat down in the adjacent chair. Didn't say anything for a full minute. That was insane, Okoye finally offered. I know. You just challenged a Kethran war commander to what amounts to a philosophical debate about hierarchy while the lives of 400 people hung in the balance. 437? I'm trying not to think about the specifics because then I start calculating how many ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Okoye leaned back. How long have you been planning this? Since this morning when the jamming started, I had about 4 hours to pull together everything I knew about Kethran military protocols, cross-reference it with current tactical data, and pray I wasn't about to get everyone killed. Mira looked up. The intelligence report was real, right? Please tell me the engineers actually did what I said they did. They did. I'm looking at the data now. It's incredibly detailed. Okoye pulled up her personal display. But how did you know? This just came through to intelligence 30 minutes ago. It's still being verified. I didn't know. I guessed based on personnel files and the fact that we've had people on Gamma 9 for 6 months with nothing to do but research projects. Engineering staff gets bored. Bored engineers hack things. I made an assumption and hoped it was right. You gambled 400 lives on a guess. I gambled 400 lives on the fact that humans are predictably unpredictable. We don't follow standard protocols when we're scared. We improvise. The Kethrans keep underestimating that because they can't imagine operating without rigid hierarchy and established doctrine. Mira rubbed her temples. I just hoped someone on that station was crazy enough to try infiltrating enemy networks during an active siege. Turns out 3 people were that crazy. Earth breeds a lot of crazy, Commander. It's kind of our thing. Okoye smiled. Actually smiled. You know the collective is going to have opinions about this. About humans using intelligence operations without proper authorization. And about invoking alien military traditions without diplomatic clearance. About basically everything you just did. Let them have opinions. I'll be too busy not dying to care. The hour crawled by. Mira tried to work on other documents, tried to distract herself with translation projects and routine correspondence, but her eyes kept drifting to the communications console, where the channel to Ketharos's flagship remained closed and silent. 43 minutes in, Ambassador Thelian approached her. He looked less angry than before, more calculating. If the Kethran commander accepts your challenge, you realize this sets a precedent. For what? For humans operating outside established collective diplomatic frameworks. For individual initiative superseding council authority. His gills fluttered neutral grey. It makes you dangerous. Good, Mira said. Maybe people will stop underestimating us. Or they will start fearing you. There is a difference. She met his eyes. Right now, Ambassador, I'll take either one over being ignored. At 57 minutes, the channel opened. Ketharos's voice emerged, and this time it was different again, formal but with an undercurrent of something Mira couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Dr. Mira Voss of the human delegation. I have consulted my command staff. We have reviewed your challenge under the protocols of Keltharaim. A pause. Your assessment is correct. We underestimated your species. This is an error that requires acknowledgement. Mira stood, walked to the display. You accept the challenge terms? I accept that humanity occupies a higher position in the hierarchy than we previously assigned. I accept that your methods of warfare, though unconventional by Dominion standards, are nonetheless effective. And I accept that destroying Gamma 9 would be a tactical mistake that serves no strategic purpose. Then you'll withdraw? We will withdraw. Your hostages will be released unharmed. Your intelligence data will remain sealed, and we will not seek retribution for the network infiltration. Another pause. But understand this, Dr. Voss. You have made an impression on the Dominion. We will be watching humanity with considerably more interest going forward. That's fine, Mira said. Let them watch. Let them learn what happens when you underestimate a species that survived by refusing to quit. You speak like a Kethran. I speak like someone who's done her homework. Ketharos made that metal-scraping laugh again. When your species finally builds proper warships, I hope to face you in honorable combat. It will be educational. I hope we never have to fight you at all, Mira replied. But if we do, we'll fight like humans, which means we'll fight in ways you don't expect. I am counting on it. Ketharos out. The channel closed. The display showed the Kethran fleet beginning to break formation, ships pulling back from their siege positions around Gamma 9. Slow. Deliberate. A withdrawal that looked like strategic repositioning rather than retreat. And because even in concession the Kethrans couldn't help maintaining appearances. But they were leaving. That was all that mattered. The council chamber stayed quiet for approximately 10 seconds. Then Commander Okoye started clapping, slow and deliberate, and the Sereni joined in with her clicking segments. And even Korvash offered a gesture that might have been approval or might have been shock. It was hard to tell with his species. Thelian didn't clap. He just watched Mira with those calculating eyes, like he was reassessing everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. Mira sat back down in her corner. Her hands were shaking properly now, adrenaline crash hitting hard, and she had to breathe very carefully to avoid either throwing up or passing out or both. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly. She'd talked the Kethran War Commander into backing down by using his own cultural protocols against him and bluffing about intelligence data that she'd only half believed existed. 437 people were going to live through the day because a translator who everyone ignored had spent 18 months reading old documents and learning a language that most species considered too complicated to bother with. Commander Okoye came over again. I'm recommending you for a commendation, and possibly a promotion, and definitely a very large drink. I'll take the drink, Mira said. You can keep the commendation. Not how it works, Dr. Voss. Then I'll accept it while quietly returning to my corner and going back to being invisible. I don't think that's going to be possible anymore. Okoye gestured at the council chamber, where multiple species were now trying to talk to Mira simultaneously, asking questions about Kethran linguistics and human intelligence capabilities, and how exactly she'd pulled off what should have been an impossible negotiation. Mira looked at them, at the ambassadors and military liaisons and diplomats who'd spent 18 months not seeing her, not hearing her, treating her like furniture that occasionally took notes. They were seeing her now. Commander, she said quietly. Yes? Can you tell them I need approximately 15 minutes before I talk to anyone? I need to go throw up in a bathroom and then possibly sit on the floor for a while. Okoye smiled. I'll handle it. Take your time. Mira walked out of the council chamber on legs that felt like rubber, found the nearest bathroom, and did exactly what she'd said she would do. When she was done being violently ill from stress and adrenaline, she sat on the cool tile floor and let herself shake properly, let all the fear she'd been suppressing come flooding back. She'd gambled. She'd gambled everything on a guess and a prayer, and the hope that humans were exactly as unpredictable as she'd claimed. And somehow, impossibly, it had worked. 3 days after the Gamma 9 incident, Mira was summoned to a meeting she didn't want to attend. The message arrived at 0600 hours, standard collective time, which meant whoever sent it either didn't understand human circadian rhythms or didn't care. Mira suspected the latter. The message was brief, formal, and signed by 5 different species representatives, including Ambassador Thelian, and which meant this wasn't a casual debrief. This was politics. She showed up wearing the same grey suit she always wore, carrying the same battered datapad, looking like exactly what she'd always been. A translator who preferred corners to spotlight. The conference room was smaller than the main council chamber, which somehow made it worse. Intimate spaces meant difficult conversations, and Mira had survived enough difficult conversations to recognize the setup. 6 beings waited for her. Thelian, the Sereni ambassador whose name was Crystalline Thought Ascending, but who went by Crystal because most species couldn't pronounce the full thing. A Viridian admiral whose scales kept shifting nervous yellow-green. A human admiral named Torres, who Mira had never met but whose reputation preceded him. Old Earth military. The kind who'd earned his stars in actual combat before humanity joined the collective. Korvash, looking uncomfortable in a way Mira hadn't seen before. And Commander Okoye, standing at attention near the door like she was prepared to either defend Mira or arrest her, depending on how this went. "Dr. Voss," Thelian began, and his tone was the careful neutral that meant he was about to say something inflammatory while pretending to be reasonable. "Thank you for joining us." Mira sat. Didn't wait for permission. "You're welcome. What is this about?" "The Gamma 9 incident has created certain complications." "You mean it's created questions about why the collective was prepared to abandon 17,000 people without even attempting negotiation?" Crystal's facets flickered. The situation was assessed as tactically unsalvageable. Standard protocol dictates. "Standard protocol is designed for species that fight like you fight," Mira interrupted. "It doesn't account for humans." Admiral Torres leaned forward. He was old, scarred, with grey hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too many things. "Which brings us to the problem, Dr. Voss. You operated outside command structure. You initiated contact with hostile forces without authorization. You invoked alien military traditions that the collective has no formal relationship with. And you did all of this based on intelligence data that was, at the time, completely unverified." The intelligence was verified. The engineers on Gamma 9 actually infiltrated Catherine networks. "We know. We've been reviewing their methodology for the last 72 hours. Torres pulled up a holographic display. "Do you want to know what we found?" Mira kept her expression neutral. "I assume you're going to tell me regardless." "We found that 3 human engineers, working with minimal equipment under siege conditions, accomplished what our best intelligence teams have been trying to do for 15 years. They cracked Catherine military encryption, not just surface-level protocols. They got into tactical networks, personnel manifests, maintenance logs. They had access to everything." He paused. "And they did it in 9 hours. Humans are creative under pressure." "Humans are concerning under pressure," Thelian corrected. "This demonstrates capabilities that were not disclosed during Earth's integration into the collective. It raises questions about what other capabilities you've been concealing." Mira looked at him. At the calculation in his eyes, "We haven't been concealing anything. You just never asked what we could do. You made assumptions based on our technology level and our military size, and you stopped looking deeper." "That is not entirely fair," Crystal said, segments clicking mild disagreement. "The collective's assessment procedures are standardized across all member species. Earth was evaluated by the same metrics we apply to everyone. Right? Metrics designed by species that have been spacefaring for thousands of years. Metrics that measure conventional military strength, economic output, technological advancement along established paths." Mira pulled up her own files. "What those metrics don't measure: adaptability, lateral thinking, the ability to improvise solutions using whatever's available. Humans spent our entire evolutionary history as persistence hunters. We didn't outrun our prey or overpower it. We followed it until it collapsed from exhaustion. That's what we do. We outlast. This is not about humanity's evolutionary history, Thelian said. This is about operational security and chain of command. You circumvented both. I saved 17,000 lives. You gambled 17,000 lives on an unproven theory about alien psychology and got lucky. The words hung in the air. Mira felt anger spike through her, hot and sharp, but she kept it locked down. Losing her temper now would just prove his point, that she was impulsive, unreliable, too human to be trusted with actual responsibility. Commander Okoye spoke up from her position by the door. With respect, Ambassador, Dr. Voss's approach was unorthodox but effective. She identified a cultural protocol that none of our xenosociologists had considered. She executed a negotiation under extreme pressure, and she achieved a bloodless resolution to a crisis that conventional tactics had written off as unsalvageable. That's not luck, that's expertise. That's insubordination, the Viridian Admiral countered, scales flashing orange. In military structure, individual initiative without authorization is grounds for discipline, regardless of outcome. Torres held up a hand. I agree with the Viridian assessment. Protocol exists for a reason, but I also agree with Commander Okoye that the outcome speaks for itself. He looked at Mira. What I want to know is whether this is reproducible. You pulled off something remarkable at Gamma 9. Can you do it again? Can other humans do it? Or was this a one-time intersection of your specific skill set and an unusual situation? Mira thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated and probably not what they wanted to hear, but she was tired of diplomatic evasion. Every human is a one-time intersection of specific skills and unusual situations, she said. We don't train for predictable excellence the way you do. We train for unpredictable problem solving. Put 100 humans in the same crisis and you'll get 100 different solutions, most of them improvised, some of them brilliant, a few of them catastrophically stupid. That's what makes us dangerous. You can't predict what we'll do because we don't know what we'll do until we're doing it. Corvash made a sound that might have been agreement. This is why the Kethran Dominion considers humans a Category 4 uncertainty factor. Not because you're strong, you're not by Dominion standards, but because you're unstable. Every engagement with human forces produces unexpected results. You don't follow tactical doctrine because you don't have doctrine. You just react. And that terrifies you, Mira said. It should terrify everyone in this room, Corvash replied. The Dominion has been fighting wars for 3,000 years. We understand warfare. We can predict how most species will respond to military pressure. But humans? He gestured with multiple limbs. Humans do things like convince a war singer to withdraw using nothing but words and audacity. Or they hack military networks during active sieges. Or they... He trailed off. Or they what? Torres prompted. Corvash looked uncomfortable. I have received reports from Dominion contacts in the last 3 days. Ketharos filed his formal report about Gamma 9. He included full details about Dr. Voss's challenge, her use of Keltharium, the intelligence penetration. The report has been circulated through Dominion command structures. And, Thelian demanded, and the Dominion High Command has issued new standing orders regarding human forces. They are no longer to be classified as negligible threats. Any engagement with human vessels or installations now requires command-level approval and detailed tactical planning. Corvash's eyes focused on Mira. One human translator has accomplished what decades of collective military resistance could not. You have made the Dominion cautious. The silence that followed was heavy. Mira watched the various beings around the table process that information, saw the way Torres's expression shifted from skepticism to something more thoughtful, saw Crystal's facets dim to contemplative amber. Thelian broke the silence. This changes the strategic calculus significantly. If the Kethrans are genuinely reassessing their position on humanity, they're not just reassessing humanity, Corvash interrupted. They're reassessing the entire collective. You must understand, Dominion strategy is built on predictability. They study species for cycles before engaging, learning patterns, identifying doctrines. But if humans can operate outside those patterns, if you can teach other species to think like you think, he made a gesture that looked like concern. The collective becomes unpredictable. That changes everything. Mira felt something cold settle in her stomach. You're saying the Kethrans might escalate because we made them nervous. I'm saying they might negotiate, Korvash corrected. Real negotiation, not the surrender or die variety. Because for the first time in Dominion history, they're facing an opponent they can't fully predict. And the Kethrans respect strength, but they respect mystery more. You've made humanity mysterious? Torres was making notes on his personal display. This needs to go up the chain. If the Dominion is actually reconsidering their strategic approach because of one incident, it's not one incident, Mira said quietly. It's never just one incident with humans. Gamma 9 was visible because it was high profile, and I got lucky with timing. But humans have been doing unpredictable things since we joined the collective. Small things. Engineering solutions that shouldn't work but do. Diplomatic approaches that violate every established protocol but somehow get results. Medical techniques that combine technologies in ways nobody thought to try. She looked around the table. You've been so focused on measuring us against your standards that you missed what we actually are. We're improvisational. We're adaptive. And we don't quit even when quitting makes sense. That is not always an advantage, Thelian said. Species that don't know when to quit often don't survive long enough to learn. We survived 6 mass extinctions, Ambassador. I think we've learned enough. Crystal clicked thoughtfully. Perhaps the question we should be asking is not whether Dr. Voss's actions were appropriate by existing standards, but whether existing standards are adequate for evaluating human capabilities. The Viridian Admiral's scales flickered uncertain yellow. You're suggesting we need new protocols. I'm suggesting we need protocols that account for humanity's specific strengths, which means giving humans more operational freedom, not less. Crystal turned to Mira. Would you agree? Mira thought about her answer. As this was a trap of a different kind. Agree, and she'd be accepting responsibility for every future human improvisation. Disagree, and she'd be admitting humans couldn't be trusted with autonomy. I think humans work best when we're given objectives, not methods, she finally said. Tell us what needs to happen, not how to make it happen. We'll find a way. It might not be the way you would choose, but it'll work. Or it'll fail spectacularly, Thelian pointed out. Yes, sometimes we fail spectacularly. But when we succeed in ways you can't anticipate. And in a war against an enemy as powerful as the Kethran Dominion, unpredictability might be the only advantage the collective has. Torres closed his display. I'm recommending a formal review of human integration protocols. Not because I think Dr. Voss did anything wrong. I think she did everything right under impossible circumstances, but because if we have more personnel with her capabilities, we need to know how to utilize them effectively. I second that recommendation, Crystal said, with the addition that Dr. Voss should be involved in the review process. She understands both human psychology and collective structures better than most. Mira wanted to argue, wanted to say that she was just a translator who'd gotten lucky and didn't want to be responsible for rewriting integration protocols. But the look on Okoye's face stopped her. This was important. This was humans getting a seat at a table they'd been excluded from. I'll participate, she said, on one condition. You're in no position to make conditions, Thelian started, but Torres cut him off. What's your condition? The engineers who infiltrated the Kethran network at Gamma 9. They violated about 40 different regulations doing what they did. I want immunity for them. Full immunity. No disciplinary action. No permanent marks on their records. They committed serious breaches of... They saved 17,000 lives, including their own, by doing something nobody thought was possible. They deserve recognition, not punishment. Torres and Crystal exchanged glances. Some kind of silent communication happened that Mira couldn't pass. Agreed, Torres finally said. Full immunity. will reclassify their actions as emergency response protocols rather than violations. And they'll be assigned to intelligence divisions where their skills can be properly utilized, Crystal added. With appropriate oversight. Of course. Oversight was just another word for control, but Mira would take it. The engineers would be alive, free, and doing work that actually mattered. Then we have an agreement, she said. The meeting continued for another hour, mostly logistics and bureaucratic details that made Mira's brain hurt. By the time she was dismissed, she had a new title, Senior Advisor for Human Collective Integration, a new security clearance, high priority diplomatic access, and a new headache, permanent and throbbing. Commander Okoye walked out with her. That went better than expected. Did it? I feel like I just agreed to become a professional human. As opposed to what you were before? An amateur human who occasionally did translations. Mira rubbed her temples. They're going to expect me to explain how humans think. How do I explain something I barely understand myself? You start by admitting you don't have all the answers. That's more honest than most advisors manage. Okoye paused at an intersection in the corridor. The Catherine situation is still developing. Keth Aros filed his report, but there are other war singers who aren't convinced. Some of them want to test humanity directly, see if your performance at Gamma 9 was representative or anomalous. Great. So, I've made us interesting to an empire that expresses interest through military force. Better than being ignored by an empire that expresses contempt through military force. Okoye pulled up her schedule. You're being assigned an assistant, someone to help manage your new responsibilities. I don't need an assistant. You need 6 assistants, but we're starting with 1. A young diplomat named Sarah Chen. Smart, ambitious, and has been studying human-alien relations since before Earth joined the collective. Mira stopped walking. Chen. Any relation to Dr. Chen from Gamma 9? Her sister. Who specifically requested assignment to your office after hearing what you did? Okoye smiled. Apparently you made an impression. I almost got her sister killed. You saved her sister's life. There's a difference. Okoye checked her comm. I have to go. Defense Committee meeting. But Mira, what you did at Gamma 9, that's going to change things. For humans, for the collective, maybe even for the Kethrans. Whether that's good or bad remains to be seen, but it's going to be interesting. She left. Mira stood in the corridor for a long moment, was watching other species move past her. Viridians and Thelians and Sereni and a dozen others. All of them part of a galactic civilization that had existed for millennia before Earth figured out faster than light travel. They were looking at her now, not with contempt or dismissal, but with curiosity, with calculation, with the dawning recognition that humanity might be small and new and technologically inferior, but that didn't mean humanity was negligible. Mira thought about Ketharos, about the way his voice had shifted from dismissive to interested when she spoke proper Kethvar, about the way he'd laughed when he realized she'd been playing a game he didn't know was being played. She thought about the engineers on Gamma 9, so cracking impossible encryption because the alternative was death, and humans were very good at refusing to accept unacceptable alternatives. She thought about every human throughout history who'd been underestimated, dismissed, ignored, and who'd proven everyone wrong through sheer stubborn refusal to be what others expected. That was humanity's real weapon. Not technology or numbers or military might. Just the absolute audacity to look at the impossible and say, "Watch me anyway." Mira pulled out her datapad, started drafting notes for the integration protocol review. She had work to do. 6 months after Gamma 9, Mira stood in a conference room that was considerably larger than the one where she'd been interrogated by Thelian and his committee. This one had windows. Actual windows looking out at the curve of Collective Central Station's primary ring, where ships from 40 different species docked and departed in an endless ballet of commerce and diplomacy. She was not alone. The room contained approximately 300 beings representing every major collective species. plus observers from a dozen neutral parties who weren't technically members but had interests in galactic stability. And in the front row, occupying seats that had been custom fabricated for their physiology, sat 5 Kethran diplomats. Not warriors, diplomats. That alone was historical. The Kethran Dominion didn't do diplomacy as the collective understood it. They did ultimatums and annexations and occasionally ceasefires that lasted exactly as long as it took them to regroup for the next assault. But here they were, sitting in a collective conference room, wearing formal diplomatic vestments instead of combat armor. Ketharos was not among them. War singers didn't attend peace conferences. But Mira recognized the lead diplomat, Diplomat Voice Kethanar, who'd been mentioned in several of the historical documents she'd studied. Old, by Kethran standards, experienced, and, according to Korvash's intelligence briefings, genuinely curious about whether the collective represented anything more than another conquest target. Sarah Chen sat beside Mira, datapad ready, taking notes with the kind of focused intensity that Mira recognized as professional panic barely contained. Sarah had been working as her assistant for 5 months now and had proven to be exactly what Okoye promised. Smart, organized, and incapable of translating Mira's half-formed ideas into actual policy proposals. She was also terrified of this presentation, which made 2 of them. "You ready?" Sarah whispered. "Absolutely not," Mira whispered back, "but we're doing it anyway." The presentation was supposed to be about human integration protocols, about the formal revisions to collective procedures that would better accommodate humanity's particular approach to problem solving. Mira had spent 3 months working with a committee of human and alien specialists to draft proposals that balanced operational freedom with institutional oversight. It was good work, important work. It was also incredibly boring compared to what was actually about to happen. Admiral Torres stood at the podium. He'd been tapped to lead this conference because he had the military credentials to command respect from species that valued martial strength, and the political savvy to navigate collective bureaucracy without starting interspecies incidents. He cleared his throat, and the room quieted. "Thank you all for attending," he began. Standard diplomatic opening. "We are here to discuss the integration of humanity into collective structures, specifically regarding operational protocols and tactical autonomy. Over the past 6 months, we have observed several instances where human personnel, operating under stress conditions, have produced results that conventional protocols did not anticipate or account for." The hollow display behind him flickered to life, showing the Gamma 9 incident in clinical tactical summary, ship positions, siege timelines, casualty projections before and after Mira's intervention. The gap between projected deaths and actual deaths was stark enough to make the point without requiring explanation. The Gamma 9 resolution demonstrated that human capabilities extend beyond measurable technological or military metrics, Torres continued. Dr. Mira Voss, who will be presenting today, has worked with a multi-species committee to develop frameworks that utilize these capabilities while maintaining operational coherence within collective command structures. He gestured. Mira stood, walked to the podium. 300 beings watched her, including 5 Kethrans who'd spent the last several thousand years conquering anything that moved and a few things that didn't. No pressure. She pulled up her first slide. The fundamental challenge in human integration is that we don't think linearly. Most collective species approach problems through established methodologies. Identify the challenge, consult doctrinal solutions, implement tested protocols. Humans skip the middle step. We go straight from problem to improvised solution, often using tools and techniques that weren't designed for the purpose we're applying them to. The next slide showed 3 case studies. The Gamma 9 network infiltration, a human medical team that had combined Viridian regenerative tech with old Earth surgical techniques to save patients no one thought were savable. A human negotiator who'd resolved a trade dispute by introducing both parties to something called poker and letting them gamble their way to compromise. What these cases have in common, Mira said, is that none of them followed collective protocols. None of them could have followed protocols because protocols don't account for creativity under pressure. What we're proposing isn't a replacement for existing structures, but an expansion. A framework that gives human personnel defined objectives with operational flexibility on methodology. Diplomat voice Kethinar raised one of his primary limbs. You are describing tactical chaos. How does the collective maintain strategic coherence if individual units are improvising without central coordination? Good question. Also exactly the question Mira had been expecting. By trusting humans to understand intent without requiring specific instruction, she replied. Kethran military doctrine, from what I've studied, and operates on the principle that commanders issue precise orders which subordinates execute exactly. That works brilliantly for your species. But humans function more effectively when given mission parameters and allowed to solve the tactical details independently. That is not discipline. That is anarchy. That is adaptability. Mira pulled up another slide, this one showing comparative effectiveness ratings from joint operations involving human personnel. The numbers were striking. Human teams underperformed in rigidly structured operations, but significantly outperformed in fluid, unpredictable scenarios. When the situation is stable and protocols apply, humans are average. When the situation degrades and protocols fail, humans excel. That's our evolutionary inheritance. We're built for chaos. A Sereni representative clicked a question. But how do you train for chaos? Training implies standardization. You don't train for chaos. You train for decision-making under chaos. Mira switched slides again. Human military training, and this predates our joining the collective, emphasizes scenario adaptation rather than rote procedure. We run exercises where the parameters change mid-operation, where equipment fails unexpectedly, where mission objectives become impossible and personnel have to improvise alternatives. We deliberately create unpredictable conditions so that humans learn to function when predictability fails. Sarah was following up with supporting documentation, feeding additional data to representatives who were pulling up their personal displays to review the material. Mira watched the room's body language. Skepticism from the Thelians, interest from the Sereni, calculating assessment from the Kethrans. The proposal before you, Mira continued, establishes 3-tier operational authority for human personnel. Tier 1. Standard collective protocols apply. Human units operate under existing command structures. Tier 2. Crisis conditions identified. Human units granted expanded operational latitude, with mission commanders authorized to deviate from doctrine if tactical situation requires. Tier 3. Catastrophic failure of conventional response. Human units operate with full autonomy under strategic oversight only. Tier 3 essentially removes command authority, Thelian said from his seat. His gills were flaring skeptical purple. But you are asking the collective to trust human judgment over institutional experience. I'm asking the collective to recognize that institutional experience sometimes produces institutional failure. Gamma 9 was written off as unsalvageable by every conventional assessment. 17,000 people were going to die because doctrine said the situation was hopeless. Mira met his eyes. One human translator with a datapad and too much education proved doctrine wrong. That's not an argument against protocol. It's an argument for having alternatives when protocol fails. Torres stepped back to the podium. The proposal includes oversight mechanisms. Human units operating under Tier 2 or 3 authority are required to report all deviations, provide tactical justification, and submit to post-operation review. We're not asking for blank checks. We're asking for structured flexibility. Kethinar spoke again. The Dominion has been analyzing human tactical patterns since the Gamma 9 incident. What we have observed is disturbing. Not because humans are particularly effective, your technology remains inferior to most collective standard, but because you are unpredictable. Our war algorithms cannot model human behavior with acceptable accuracy. Because we don't have algorithms, Mira said. We have instincts, creativity, and a pathological refusal to accept defeat even when defeat is statistically inevitable. That is not a military virtue. That is a survival mechanism. For humans, they're the same thing. We survived as a species by being too stubborn to go extinct. She pulled up her final slide. Which brings me to the actual reason we're having this conference. The room went very quiet. This wasn't on the agenda. Sarah looked at her with wide eyes that said, "Please tell me you're not about to blow up 6 months of careful diplomacy." Mira was absolutely about to blow up 6 months of careful diplomacy. The Kethrin Dominion has been reassessing humanity since Gamma 9, she said. Not just our military capabilities, but our strategic position. You're wondering whether the collective has become unpredictable enough to make conquest too costly. Whether humanity's integration has changed the tactical landscape. She looked directly at Kethinar. I'm here to tell you that it has. Torres made a small gesture that might have been proceed cautiously or might have been, what the hell are you doing? Hard to tell. The collective has spent centuries developing standardized approaches to warfare, diplomacy, and crisis management, Mira continued. Those approaches work brilliantly against predictable opponents. But humans aren't predictable, and we're starting to teach other species our tricks. The engineers who cracked your encryption at Gamma 9. They've been training Sereni technicians in lateral problem solving. The medical team that combined technologies unconventionally. They're running workshops on creative synthesis for Viridian practitioners. We're not just integrating into the collective, we're changing how the collective thinks. Kethinar's mandibles clicked together slowly. You are claiming that humanity is making the collective dangerous. I'm claiming that humanity is making the collective unpredictable, which amounts to the same thing from the Dominion's perspective. Mira pulled up intelligence reports, sanitized versions that had been cleared for general release. Kethrin military doctrine relies on accurate threat modeling. You study opponents for cycles, learning their patterns, identifying their responses to specific stimuli. Then you engineer situations where their patterns work against them. It's elegant, it's effective, and it completely fails when the opponent doesn't have patterns. All species have patterns. Patterns, yes. Predictable patterns, no. And that's what's changed. The collective used to be predictable, not weak, but predictable. You knew how we'd respond to military pressure, what concessions we'd make, where our breaking points were. But now, she smiled, now you're not sure. Because you can't model what humans will do, and humans are starting to influence what everyone else does. The Thelian ambassador stood. This is provocative language in what is supposed to be a diplomatic forum. You are essentially threatening the Kethrin delegation. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm explaining reality. Mira turned back to Kethinar. The Dominion has 3 options. First, continue current hostilities, accept that the collective has become too unpredictable to conquer efficiently, lose ships and personnel in engagements that should be straightforward but aren't. Second, escalate massively, commit overwhelming force, and hope that raw power compensates for tactical uncertainty. Third, negotiate actual peace terms, acknowledge that the strategic landscape has shifted, and find ways to coexist that don't require constant military pressure. You believe the Dominion would choose the third option. I believe the Dominion respects strength and mystery, and humanity has given you both. Strength through unpredictability, mystery through adaptation. We're not asking you to surrender or admit defeat. We're offering you the opportunity to recognize that continued warfare with the collective is no longer cost-effective. Kethinar was silent for a long moment. The other Kethrin diplomats were communicating through subtle gestures, mandible clicks, posture shifts that Mira had learned to read from linguistic analyses. They were arguing. Specifically, they were arguing about whether Mira was arrogant enough to deserve execution or clever enough to deserve serious consideration. She'd take either one. Or honestly, attention was attention. Dr. Voss, Kethinar finally said, you speak with remarkable confidence for someone who represents a species that joined galactic civilization yesterday. Yesterday by your standards, maybe. But humans have been surviving impossible situations for 200,000 years. We're very good at it. Mira gestured at the displays. The proposal before you isn't just about human integration protocols. It's about recognizing that the collective is changing, evolving, incorporating new approaches to old problems. You can adapt to that reality, or you can spend the next 100 cycles fighting a war that never quite resolves because your opponents keep doing things you didn't predict. And if we choose to fight, then we fight, and sometimes we lose, but we never stay lost. She paused. Humans have a saying, fall down 7 times, stand up 8. It doesn't make mathematical sense, but it describes us perfectly. You can knock us down as many times as you want. We'll keep getting back up. The room was so quiet, Mira could hear her own heartbeat. She'd just delivered what amounted to a declaration that humanity had changed the galactic strategic balance in a room full of beings who were accustomed to thinking in terms of 1,000-year civilizations and established power dynamics. This was either going to work, or she was about to cause an interstellar incident. Kethinar stood. The other Ketharan diplomats stood with him. Formal positioning. This was a moment. The Dominion will consider what you have said, he stated, a voice carrying that perfectly neutral tone that Ketharans used when they were genuinely thinking rather than posturing. But understand, this changes nothing immediately. We do not make peace because one species demonstrated cleverness. We make peace when the calculus of warfare shifts decisively. The calculus has shifted, Mira said. You just haven't finished running the numbers yet. Kethinar's mandibles clicked what might have been approval or might have been threat. When we have run the numbers, Dr. Voss, we will communicate our conclusions. Until then, the Dominion maintains its strategic position. As you wish, Diplomat Voice. The Ketharan delegation departed in formal procession. The rest of the room erupted into arguments and discussions, and what was probably going to be 17 different diplomatic complaints filed through 17 different channels. Torres looked like he was aging in real time. Thelian was making a sound that suggested his species could experience aneurysms. Sarah grabbed Mira's arm. That was not in the presentation plan. I know. You just told the Ketharans that humanity made the collective too dangerous to fight. I did. They could interpret that as a declaration of war. Or they could interpret it as an invitation to negotiate peace on terms that preserve everyone's dignity. Depends on how they run their numbers. Mira picked up her datapad. Either way, we've established that humans can't be ignored or underestimated, which was the point. Torres approached, looking distinctly unimpressed. We're going to have a conversation about running unauthorized provocations during official diplomatic proceedings. Looking forward to it, Admiral. I doubt that. But he was almost smiling. Almost. Off the record, that was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. We'll know which in about 6 months. 6 months is optimistic. I'm an optimist. Torres pulled up his schedule. You have about 40 representatives who want to speak with you immediately, half of whom are angry and half of whom are fascinated. How would you like to handle that? Mira looked at Sarah, who looked back with an expression that said, I cannot believe this is my job now. Set up meetings for tomorrow, Mira decided. Today, I'm going to find a quiet corner somewhere and process the fact that I just casually threatened a galactic empire in front of 300 witnesses. That's probably wise. She left the conference room through a side exit that Sarah had scouted beforehand. Her assistant was very good at identifying escape routes. The corridor outside was blessedly empty, just the quiet hum of station life and the distant sound of ships docking. Mira found a viewing port that looked out at the dark between stars. Earth was out there somewhere, small blue world that had produced beings strange enough to confuse empires and stubborn enough to refuse extinction. Her comm chimed. Message from Keth Aros, routed through about 15 layers of security and diplomatic channels. It read, You spoke well, translator. The Dominion is paying attention. And do not disappoint us. Mira laughed. Couldn't help it. She'd spent 18 months being invisible, being ignored, being the quiet human in the corner who took notes while others made decisions. And now she had a Catherine war singer sending her what amounted to a compliment wrapped in a threat. She typed a response. "We'll do our best. Humans are very good at being interesting." Sent it. Closed her comm. Looked back at the stars. 6 months ago, everyone had underestimated her. Underestimated humanity. Underestimated what you could accomplish with creativity, stubbornness, and enough audacity to challenge a war fleet using nothing but words. Now they were paying attention. Now they understood that humanity didn't need to be the strongest or the oldest or the most technologically advanced. Why they just needed to be themselves, unpredictable, adaptive, and absolutely unwilling to accept that anything was truly impossible. Out there in the dark, empires were running their numbers, reassessing their strategies, wondering what humanity would do next. The honest answer was that humanity didn't know yet. They'd figure it out when the time came, improvise solutions using whatever they had available, and probably surprise everyone, including themselves. That was the human way. That was the thing every species eventually learned, usually after underestimating humanity one time too many. Mira smiled at her reflection in the viewing port, small, unimpressive, easily dismissed. Until she spoke, until she acted, until she showed them exactly what a human could do when everyone expected nothing. "Watch us anyway," she said to her reflection, to the stars, to every empire and civilization that thought they had humanity figured out. "Watch us anyway."